Hello, welcome to the fourth session of Unit 1, Introduction to International Trade. I'm your host, Elias. In this video, I'm going to take you through increasing costs and see the gains from trade as well as the gains from specialization. Okay, so let's look at the increasing opportunity cost in more details, which tells us that the nation then must give up more and more of one commodity to release just enough resources to produce each additional unit of another commodity. That means when we are measuring increasing opportunity cost, we will notice that for each additional unit of say commodity X that the nation adds, then we will have the cost, the amounts of Y given up will be more. But what you will see is that the desire for the nation to release some items will be less. So it means the cost of such a production will be increasing. That means to produce an additional unit, we'll be giving up more and more units of commodity resources needed for the production of commodity Y. Now this results in a production frontier that is concave from the origin and not a straight line. That means our PPF then will be bulged outward like that. Okay, so with that, then increasing opportunity cost gives room to nations not to completely specialize in producing one commodity. Because now, if the nation wants to produce a given commodity, the cost to that nation will be increasing, and therefore it will be willing to release just few and few units. As such, then we are saying the nation is able to produce both commodities and not specialize completely. Consider two nations, 1 and 2, and two commodities, X and Y, with nation 1's production frontier drawn here. We will notice that if we pick point A as our starting point and we are moving down to point B, if you look at the gaps here, we've put it in gaps of 20. For the first 20 units of X that the nation has decided to produce, there are a few units of Y that are given up. And if you produce an extra 20, you'll be seeing that the gap here is becoming big. For another 20 units of X, the gap is growing. For another 20, the gap is expanding, and so on, which shows you that we are dealing with increasing opportunity cost. You can also see this from nation 2, that as you are moving from point A prime up to point B, if you are gaining, you want to produce 20 units of Y, you'll be giving up increasing amounts of X for each additional 20 that you are bringing into the production process. Thus, increasing opportunity cost result when inputs are not perfect substitutes for each other, as opposed to the constant cost that we saw. Okay, so let's look at the implication of increasing cost on specialization and trade. In other words, we observe this on the effect of the gains. Okay, so we assume that in the absence of trade, nation 1 is located at point A along its production frontier, where it's producing 5x and 18y. So let me take you to that graph. So this is the graph we are looking at. In autarky, nation A is at this nation 1, let's call it nation 1, is at point A, and at this point A, the nation is producing 5 of X and 18 of Y. Note also that this is also the consumption point when the nation is in autarky or in isolation. And that means in autarky, nation A is also consuming 5, nation 1 is also consuming 5 of X and 18 of Y. Now from here, we see that the slope of this line, this at point A, the slope of the curve is 0.33, which means that the opportunity cost of producing an additional unit of X is 0.33Y. And because we are only dealing with two nations, It means the opportunity cost of producing an additional unit of X for the other nation will be the reciprocal of 0.33, which means for the other nation, the opportunity cost will be 3Y. Therefore, nation 1 has a comparative advantage in the production of commodity X, meaning nation 2 then will have a comparative advantage in the production of commodity Y. With that, we can then note that the nation 1 will specialize in the production of commodity X and then reach point B, where the international terms of trade are equal in both nations. Which means that if we target, if the international terms of trade is 1, then we'll continue specializing until we reach 1, where the slope or the slope of this frontier is 1. At that point, the international terms of trade faced by nation 1 is equal to the international terms of trade faced by nation 2. And the opportunity cost here are the same, meaning there will be no comparative advantage at point B. And this new line that we have is now our trading possibility line. We can see this analysis from nation 2, assuming that nation 2 is at point A prime in autarky, meaning that it's producing 6 units of Y and 17 units of X. Now, because this is autarky, and we noted that in autarky, consumption is equal to production, this means that nation 2 then will be consuming 6 units of Y and 17 units of X in autarky. Now, we see again here that the slope of the PPF at point A prime is equal to 3Y, which is the reciprocal of nation 1's terms of trade, domestic terms of trade. And therefore, this shows that nation 2 has a comparative disadvantage in the production of commodity X, but a comparative advantage in the production of commodity Y. As such, nation 2 will specialize in the production of commodity Y, and thus it will be moving up the frontier from point A prime going up until the international terms of trade are equal in both nations, which is equal to 1. When the international terms of trade are equal, we will notice that nation 2 then will produce 13 units of X and 13 units of Y. And this new line, or rather the line that is joining that is tangent to the PPF at point B, is what we call the trade possibility line for nation 2. So from there then we can start measuring our gains, that with specialization, total gains to be shared between the two countries is 3X and 3Y. So note that we are arriving at that because from our production point, we will notice that if nation A wants to consume the same amount, nation 1 wants to consume the same amount of X as it did when it was in autarky, given trade, then nation 1 will specialize in producing X, then it trade off some amount and then consume at point C. Now we are guided here that nation A is exporting 7 units of X and importing 7 units of Y. So you will see that from point B, for a nation to consume at point C, it means 7 units of X have been exported. Let me draw that for you. Okay, so 7 units of X from here to here have been exported, and 7 units of Y have been imported, which passes through the autarky point, and therefore we see that nation 1 is consuming the autarky units for commodity X, but more of Y have been consumed. In the similar way, we see that for nation 2, which also wants to consume the autarky level at after trade, in terms of commodity Y, we see that the trade possibility line, which is this one here, will give us a consumption point, point C, where again we note that 7 units of X of Y are exported and 7 units of X are imported. So 7 of Y exported, 7 of X are imported. and we're talking about this area here. So 7 of Y are exported and the 7 of X are imported, which then shows that the nation will be consuming at point E, which is 6 units of Y and 20 units of X. So if we take this into a deep analysis and measure the gains from specialization and the gains from trade, we will notice that before specialization, let's begin with production. So before specialization, Nation 1 was producing 5 units of X and 18 units of Y. And Nation 2 was producing 17 units of X and 6 units of Y. If we add the two, we will see that the X production before specialization, in other words in autarky, was 22, and the Y production in autarky was 24. So this is the total production when the two nations were in autarky. And after specialization, we note that Nation 1 produces 12 units of X and 14 units of Y. Notice here that more of X has been produced, so from 5 to 12, but less of Y has been produced from 18 to 14. But Nation 1 has produced both commodities, meaning that it has not completely specialized. But however, we've taken note that there is a trade-off that will happen during the production process. Nation 2 produces 13 units of X and 13 units of Y after specialization. And again here we see that more of Y has been produced by Nation 2 and less of X because of comparative advantage. And therefore the world production for X will be 25 and for Y will be 27, which is simply the sum of 12 plus 13, which will give us 25, and 14 plus 13, which will give us 27. When measuring the net gains or the gains from production, we subtract the X production after specialization minus the X production before specialization, which is 12 minus 5, and we will end up with 7. And then we also subtract the Y production after specialization minus the Y production before specialization, and we will have negative 4. So we do the same for Nation 2, that after specialization, 13 units of X are produced, and therefore we subtract 13 minus 17. We will have our negative 4 here, and then we subtract the 13 units of Y after specialization minus the 6 units of Y produced in autarky, and we will have 7. If we sum up these net gains, we will have the total gains or in production over 3 in X and 3 in Y. So it is these gains then that must be distributed between Nation 1 and Nation 2. So let's look at the consumption gains from trade, if these nations now trade off whatever they've produced with the other nation. So with trade, Nation 1 can choose a consumption point along the international terms of trade line, which is a TT. And if we assume that Nation 1 prefers to consume the same amount, so we saw that then Nation 1 will go to point C and Nation 2 will go to point C prime. So given this information then, we see that with a trade, Nation A consumes 5 and 21 of Y, while Nation B consumes 20 of X and 6 of Y. So this is the information that we have. So before trade, 5 of X were consumed. This is equal to domestic production of X, and 18 of Y was consumed. This is equal to the production of Y in autarky. For Nation 2, 17 of Y was consumed, and 17 of X and 6 of Y. The world consumption was 22 of X and 24 of Y. And note that this is equal to the world domestic production. And after trade, 5 of X is consumed in Nation 1 because Nation 1 wants to consume the same amount as the autarky consumption, so we will have 5. But notice that the consumption of Y has increased from 18 to 21, given that the nations have exchanged 7x for 7Y. The net gains, we subtract the 5 of X minus after a trade minus the 5 of X before trade, and we will have 0 net gain. In terms of commodity Y, we subtract 21 minus 18 and we will have 3. Moving on to nation 2. So after trade, nation 2 consumes 20 of X, and therefore we subtract the after trade consumption minus the 17, which is the pre-trade consumption. And therefore we see that the net gain will be 3. While for commodity Y, because nation 2 wants to consume the same amount as it did before trade, therefore the net gain will be 0 for commodity Y. And if we sum up these two values, we see that the net gains or the total gains in consumption for commodity X will be 3, and the gains for in consumption for commodity Y will be 3. So it means that then both nations have gained in trade as a result of specializing. So thank you very much for watching. If you have questions, please send an email to muauelias.com. Okay, at gmail.com. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.